That's how it all started. Not with a scandal. Not with betrayal. Just laughter, the quiet, condescending kind that echoes in boardrooms when you're the only one not playing along. My name's Rachel Lane, Senior Account Strategist at Sterling and Rowe Consulting, a firm so obsessed with image that we polished our coffee mugs more often than our ethics. For 5 years, I'd poured everything into this company: long nights, client crises, impossible deadlines, and I'd earned their trust, or so I thought. The problem began when we landed Regal Dynamics, one of the biggest manufacturing clients in the state. They were worth over $10 million annually, and to our CEO, Mark Holloway, that contract was the jewel in his crown. Mark was charming, photogenic, and ruthless. The kind of man who could talk about team values while quietly throwing you under a bus. I was the lead analyst on Regal's account, and I noticed small inconsistencies early on. Numbers didn't quite match, projections were inflated, deliverables were missing fine print. I flagged it gently at first. "We might be over-promising on the Q3 metrics," I said in a meeting. Mark brushed me off with a smile that could have sold poison as perfume. "Relax, Rachel," he said. "You're too careful. Clients love confidence, not caution." Everyone laughed. Even Ethan, our operations head, the man I once considered a mentor. That laughter stung more than I wanted to admit. I tried again a week later, this time in private. "Mark, I really think we should recalibrate the client's growth projections," I said, showing him my analysis. "If these numbers don't align with actual output, Regal's going to notice." He took a long sip of his espresso and smirked. "Rachel, that's why I keep you around. You worry for both of us. But we're not changing a thing." That's when I realized something. At Sterling and Rowe, numbers didn't have to be true, they just had to be convincing. Still, I stayed quiet. Part of me didn't want to believe what I was seeing. I told myself maybe I was overreacting, maybe this was how big business worked. But every time I saw Mark wink at Ethan across the table, or watched them share those silent, knowing glances during meetings, my gut twisted tighter. Then came the dinner. Regal's executive team invited us to their annual corporate gala, a big, glamorous event meant to celebrate the partnership. I should have been proud. Instead, I spent the evening faking smiles, listening to Mark take credit for my team strategies, even joking about how Rachel's the warrior who keeps us in check. The crowd laughed again, and I laughed too, but it wasn't real. Something deep inside me had started to harden. At one point, Jordan Keene, Regal's CEO, pulled me aside. "You're the one who built the Q3 model, right?" "Yes," I said cautiously. He frowned. "Strange. The projections we received last week looked exaggerated. Not your usual precision." My pulse quickened. "Exaggerated how?" He hesitated, then smiled tightly. "Maybe I'm mistaken. Enjoy your evening." That smile wasn't reassurance, it was warning. Back at the office, I pulled the latest client deck from the shared drive. Someone had replaced my slides. The original cautious forecasts gone. In their place were glittering numbers and claims I never wrote. I froze. Only a few people had access: Mark, Ethan, and myself. And I hadn't touched it since final review. I stayed late that night, alone under the dim glow of my desk lamp, scrolling through version histories and metadata. The timestamps told a story no one else would admit. The changes had been made after hours, from Ethan's workstation. The next morning, I confronted him in the hallway. "Did you update the Regal deck?" I asked quietly. He smiled without meeting my eyes. "Mark thought it needed more optimism." "Don't worry, it makes us look good." "Optimism?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "You changed data without consulting me." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Rachel, learn the game. Numbers don't close deals, confidence does." I stood there, frozen, as he walked away. Around me, the office buzzed with morning chatter, oblivious to the slow collapse beginning beneath our polished surface. That night, I sat in my car staring at the company's glass tower, lights flickering across its mirrored walls. For years, I'd believed hard work and integrity could protect me. But looking at my own reflection in that glass, I saw someone naive, someone who thought warnings mattered in a room full of egos. And somewhere between fear and anger, I felt something shift. A quiet thought whispered through my mind. They think I'll stay silent. They think I'll clean up their mess like always. I didn't know it yet, but that night, the night I stopped believing in their rules, was the moment everything began to unravel. Something shifted after that night, not loudly, not dramatically, but in subtle, unsettling ways only I seemed to notice. The first red flag wasn't a shout, it was a whisper. Mark, who used to loop me into every client email, suddenly began forgetting to copy me. Meetings about Regal Dynamics started popping up without calendar invites. When I asked Ethan about them, he gave that same infuriating half-smile. Oh, those? Just quick syncs. Nothing major. But I knew better. In corporate life, nothing major always means something you're not supposed to know. Still, I tried to silence my doubts. Maybe they were right, maybe I was just too cautious, too tightly wound. So, I pushed harder to prove myself useful. I worked late, cross-checking data, sending carefully worded summaries, doing the quiet, thankless work that kept the company's illusions intact. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being quietly erased. The next red flag came with the new project assignments. Mark announced them at the Monday meeting with his usual performance, all charisma and toothy confidence. So, he said, leaning against the glass table, for Regal Dynamics expansion phase, Ethan will lead strategy and client relations. Samantha will assist with analytics. My heart sank. That was my account, my work, my late nights, my client relationships. I raised my hand slowly. Mark, I thought I'd be handling Regal since he cut me off with a laugh. Rachel, we just thought you deserved a break. You've been under a lot of pressure lately. The room laughed with him. That same laugh. The one that sounds like camaraderie, but tastes like dismissal. I smiled tightly and nodded, but inside, my pulse hammered against my ribs. A break? Or a setup? After the meeting, I found Ethan by the espresso bar. So, Regal's all yours now? He shrugged. For now. Mark thinks my style aligns better with their new direction. You know how it is, client optics. Client optics. That word again. It was starting to sound like a weapon. Over the next few weeks, the office energy turned strange. Conversations stopped when I entered the room. Slack threads I used to be part of vanished overnight. Ethan and Samantha started taking off-site meetings without me, even though I'd built the entire forecasting framework they were using. When I asked Mark for an update, he waved me off. Rachel, we just need everyone to play to their strengths. You're better with the back-end analytics. Let Ethan handle the people side. Translation, we're pushing you out of sight. That night, I stayed late again, partly to finish reports, partly because I didn't want to go home to the silence of my apartment. The office was dim and humming softly under the fluorescent lights. I was running an audit check when an email popped into my drafts folder, one I hadn't written. It was addressed to Jordan Keene at Regal Dynamics. Subject, updated metrics for Phase 2 proposal. Attached, a spreadsheet with exaggerated projections, ones I'd flagged weeks ago. My name was on the footer. My signature. My credentials. Except I hadn't sent it. I stared at the screen, nausea crawling up my throat. Someone was using my templates, my work, to legitimize false data. I checked the metadata. The file had been created on a shared workstation logged in under Ethan's credentials. The world went quiet around me. I wanted to believe it was a mistake. Maybe he'd just borrowed my template. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew. I'd seen this pattern before. They were rewriting the story, removing me one version at a time. The next morning, I walked into the office determined to confront Mark. But the second I stepped inside the glass conference room, I froze. The Regal team was already there, all smiles and firm handshakes. Mark turned to me and said, Rachel, perfect timing. We were just discussing how your updated metrics have impressed the client. My stomach twisted. I met Jordan's eyes across the table. He gave me a polite nod, but something flickered behind his expression. Confusion? Disappointment? I swallowed hard. I haven't sent any updates yet, I said. Mark's expression didn't change, but his tone did, soft, measured, dangerous. Of course you did, Rachel. Maybe you've just been burning the candle at both ends again. It happens. Laughter again. The same suffocating chorus. I sat through the meeting in silence, my mind racing. Every word out of Mark's mouth felt rehearsed, every smile a layer of manipulation. By the time it ended, I wasn't sure if I was angry or terrified. Back at my desk, I stared out at the city skyline, lights blinking like false promises. My heart said run, but my mind said wait. If I left now, they'd bury me with the story they'd already begun to write, the unstable employee who overreacted. No, not yet. For the first time in years, I didn't trust my instincts, but I trusted the unease. Something was coming. Something big. And if I wanted to survive it, I'd have to stop warning them and start watching them. The truth didn't hit me all at once. It came in fragments, like broken glass catching the light, sharp and unexpected. A week after the updated metrics fiasco, I noticed something strange. The Regal Dynamics shared drive, the one I'd always had access to, suddenly required new credentials. When I asked IT about it, they said Mark had restricted permissions to streamline operations. Streamline. Another pretty word for erase Rachel from the picture. Still, I wasn't ready to accept what that meant. I told myself it was temporary. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe Mark and Ethan really were trying to protect the company's optics. Then came the email. It was late, close to midnight, when my phone buzzed. A message from Jordan Keene, Regal's CEO. Rachel, we've reviewed your revised projections. Impressive work, though we'd like to discuss a few inconsistencies. Let's schedule a call tomorrow morning. Jordan, I reread the line, your revised projections until the words blurred. I hadn't sent him anything. Not a single file since the night I found the forged spreadsheet. My fingers went numb. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I spent the night at my laptop, combing through internal folders and archived backups. If someone had sent that data, it had to be traceable. At 2:17 a.m., I found it. Hidden inside the shared operations folder, a zip file labeled Regal_final_approved. It had been created under my username. Except the access log told a different story. User, Rachel Lane accessed by Mark Holloway timestamp, 11:42 p.m., Friday. My stomach dropped. He hadn't just stolen my work, he'd used my credentials to legitimize his lies. The file itself was worse than I imagined. Every data set had been inflated, profit margins, client ROI, operational efficiency, all numbers Mark had demanded I tone down weeks ago. The new version screamed perfection. Unrealistic, impossible perfection. And now my name was stamped on every page. The next morning, I walked into the office feeling like a ghost. The walls of glass and chrome seemed colder than ever, reflecting faces I no longer trusted. Mark was already in the conference room, his jacket draped casually over his chair. He looked up, smiling like nothing was wrong. Morning, Rachel. Big day. We're finalizing the Regal renewal today. I swallowed hard. Did you send the new proposal? He raised an eyebrow. Of course. You approved it, remember. Something in me snapped. No, Mark. I didn't. You used my credentials. You forged those numbers. The smile never left his face. He just leaned back, hands clasped behind his head. Rachel, you're tired. You've been under pressure for months. If you start accusing people without proof, it won't look good for you. For me. I felt the room tilt slightly. He wasn't just gaslighting me, he was setting up my fall. Before I could respond, Ethan walked in, carrying a stack of reports. Everything okay? He asked, glancing between us. Mark chuckled. Just a misunderstanding. Rachel's been anxious lately. Ethan gave me that pitying look, the one people reserve for someone they think has lost control. Take it easy, Rachel. We've got this. I walked out before I said something I couldn't take back. The call with Regal later that afternoon was the breaking point. I joined the video meeting late, my hands shaking. Jordan's tone was polite but clipped. Rachel, we've reviewed your data. We based last week's inventory expansion on it, and it's already showing signs of overprojection. We need to understand what happened. Every word felt like a knife twisting deeper. Mr. Keene, I said carefully, I didn't approve that version. The numbers you received were altered. Mark's voice cut in before I could continue. What Rachel means, he said smoothly, is that she's still reconciling older data sets. There's been some confusion internally. Jordan frowned. Confusion that cost us $3.2 million in lost contracts? The silence that followed was deafening. My throat went dry. Mark smiled faintly, as if rehearsing remorse. We take full responsibility, of course, he said. Rachel will coordinate the correction immediately. He had done it. He'd thrown me under the bus, in front of a $10 million client. The meeting ended abruptly. Regal wasn't satisfied. Their tone was cold, formal, final. I knew that tone. It was the sound of a client walking away. When the call ended, I sat staring at the blank screen, numb. The office around me buzzed faintly, printers, phones, muted laughter, but I couldn't hear any of it. My chest felt hollow, my mind stuck replaying every ignored warning, every forced smile, every time I'd chosen diplomacy over truth. Mark walked past my desk later, his voice low enough for only me to hear. You should have stayed quiet, Rachel. You made this messy. He patted my shoulder, casual, condescending, and walked away. That touch burned. For a long time, I just sat there, tears stinging the corners of my eyes. Not the loud, heaving kind, just quiet, hot ones that refused to fall. I'd given this company everything, my time, my loyalty, my voice, and they'd used it all against me. But beneath the grief, beneath the shock and humiliation, something colder began to stir. It wasn't rage. Not yet. It was focus. Mark thought I was broken, that I'd crawl away quietly while he spun his story. He had no idea that this was the moment I stopped being scared. I wiped my eyes, straightened my blazer, and whispered to myself, all right. You want optics, Mark? Let's play your game. The storm had begun, not loud, not fast, but deliberate. And when it hit, they'd remember every warning they ignored. The Monday after the Regal fiasco felt different. Not quieter, just heavier. The entire office buzzed under a tension no one dared name. Whispered meetings. Avoided eye contact. Forced smiles that cracked the moment backs were turned. And at the center of it all sat me, the woman everyone now looked at like a cautionary tale. My access had been revoked from nearly every client folder. My name had disappeared from the Regal file chain. Even my team, the people I'd trained from scratch, avoided my desk like it was radioactive. By noon, an official email went out from corporate. Effective immediately, Rachel Porter will be stepping away from the Regal Dynamics account to assist with internal auditing. Stepping away. The corporate way of saying we're burying her quietly. I sat staring at the email, my chest tight but my hands steady. The old me, the one who believed fairness would eventually prevail, would have cried, begged for a chance to explain. But that version of me had died somewhere between Mark's smirk and Ethan's silence. I closed my laptop, stood up, and walked to the restroom. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Puffy eyes. Cracked lipstick. A faint line between her brows that hadn't been there before. But beneath all that, I saw something else, a spark I hadn't noticed in weeks. Something fierce. Something awake. That's when it hit me. No one was coming to save me. Not HR. Not the board. Not even justice. Not unless I built it myself. I'd warned them. They'd ignored me. They thought I'd fade quietly into the background. They forgot who trained half this floor. Who built the forecasting model they still used. Who had copies, all the copies. I splashed cold water on my face and whispered to my reflection, you've already survived worse. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. That night, I didn't go home. I went to the old archive room, the one everyone forgot existed after the company switched to cloud systems. Dusty shelves. Faded binders. A single flickering light in the corner. My keycard still worked. Apparently, Mark hadn't thought to revoke that. One by one, I pulled old project folders, client summaries, audit logs, everything that traced financial data back through the years. I didn't need much. Just patterns. Enough to show the truth. Mark had always been obsessed with numbers that looked good. He'd pushed impossible growth rates, inflated metrics, buried losses under restructuring costs. I'd warned him more than once that our projections were unrealistic. He'd laughed. Rachel, no one wants to invest in reality. They invest in confidence. Confidence. That word used to sound like ambition. Now it sounded like rot. I worked through the night, piecing together fragments, comparing his final revisions with the original data I'd saved on my personal drive years ago. The differences weren't just small adjustments. They were fabrications. Entire columns of profit that didn't exist. Expenses reclassified as assets. It was all there, subtle enough to fool most auditors, but not me. At 3:12 a.m., I sat back and exhaled. I had proof. Maybe not enough to destroy him yet, but enough to pull a thread that would unravel everything. And I wasn't scared anymore. The next morning, I walked into the office early, before most of the team arrived. I wore black. Not for mourning, for precision. As I passed Mark's office, he looked up from his desk, flashing that practiced grin. "Rachel," he said, "I was just about to call you in. We need to discuss your—" I cut him off. "Don't bother. I already know what you did." He blinked, then smirked. "Still on that?" I leaned forward slightly, my tone calm, almost gentle. "You should have deleted the old servers before forging new data. You left fingerprints everywhere." For the first time, his expression flickered, just for a second. I smiled. A real one this time. Small, deliberate, lethal. "Don't worry, Mark. I'm not going to HR. I'm not going to make a scene. I'm just going to let the truth do what it always does, surface." And with that, I walked out. By the end of the day, whispers had already begun spreading. People had seen me in the archives. Someone noticed Mark's panicked call to IT. The office tension that once suffocated me was now his cage. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need revenge right away. I just needed time, and time was already on my side. That night, as I stood in my apartment overlooking the city, I thought about everything I'd lost and everything I was about to reclaim. They took my credibility, but not my clarity. My voice, but not my vision. And maybe that's what true strength really is, not being untouched by betrayal, but learning to rise through it. I opened my laptop and started writing. A new report, detailed and transparent, with every piece of evidence in place. I'd make sure it reached the right eyes quietly, methodically. Because sometimes, revenge doesn't need to scream. It just needs to breathe long enough to outlast the lie. And I was done holding my breath. They still treated me like I'd been broken. That made everything easier. For a week, I moved like someone practicing patience. I smiled when colleagues passed me in the hall. I answered Slack messages in measured sentences. I let Mark preen in the sun, believing the story he'd fed the partners, the careful puppet who'd snapped under pressure. He'd already convinced half the floor. He hadn't convinced me. Step 1 was control. If I wanted to undo what he'd done, I couldn't rely on rage. I needed records, timelines, and witnesses, the kind of dry, airtight proof that leaves no room for spin. So I started where the liars always left fingerprints, the machines. I still had access to the old archive room. I still had my external drives tucked away at home. I copied everything, original drafts, earlier versions of the Regal deck, the raw data exports I'd saved every night for 3 months, just in case. I stopped trusting corporate servers and built my own chain of custody, encrypted drives labeled by date and hash, a spreadsheet that mapped every file to its origin. When you document the small things, who exported a CSV at 11:42 p.m., which workstation's MAC address made the change, you turn gossip into a timeline. Next, I recruited 2 quiet allies. The first was Jordan Keene, the Regal CEO. He hadn't been a fan of our polish-first approach. He respected data. I sent him a short, professional message. "Jordan, I believe there are original drafts that contradict the version you received. If you're interested, I can share them privately for your audit." He replied with one line, "Yes." Discreetly. "Meet me." That meeting changed everything. He didn't want drama. He wanted facts. When I handed him a copy of the original deck and explained the discrepancies, his face tightened in the way a man who'd lost millions looks when offered the chance to understand why. The second ally was the unlikely one, Mr. Luis, the janitor who had a habit of noticing details everyone else missed. I'd helped him with his bucket months ago, and he'd paid me back with an old loyalty that had nothing to do with titles. He'd already found one misplaced USB that contained a late-night export. He began leaving me small things, a security camera timestamp he'd seen on a maintenance log, a note about an unlocked drawer, the way a cleaning crew member remembered someone staying late with a laptop. He didn't understand server metadata, but he understood patterns, and memory is evidence in its own way. Inside the firm, I worked carefully. I rebuilt access logs into readable narratives and walked the shadows of the office with soft questions. I asked Samantha neutral-sounding queries about workflows. Which machine did you use to export the appendices? Do you recall who requested the last-minute figures? She was frightened at first, loyal to Mark's orbit, but I didn't corner her. I fed curiosity, not accusation. People say too much when they're trying to be helpful. Under casual pressure, she admitted she'd been asked to forward a polished deck late on Friday. She hadn't known the numbers were fabricated. She'd been doing what she'd been taught: obey. I found a forensic accountant, a freelance consultant Jordan recommended, and bought myself credibility. He read the spreadsheets and said what I already suspected: edits traced to a terminal tied to Mark's office, export timestamps that didn't match the team's working hours, formula cells replaced with hard numbers at strategic points. He taught me how to present a pattern of manipulation so dry that even PR couldn't spin sympathy for the perpetrator. But evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed to use people's hunger for self-preservation against them. Mark's greatest weakness was optics. He needed others to reinforce his image. So I set social traps that looked accidental. I started by letting a quiet, factless rumor drift into an industry contact at a trade publication, nothing that could be traced back to me, just a line. Hearing whispers that Sterling and Rose metrics don't always match reality, big clients are checking twice. The journalist called a week later. Investors asked questions. When the partners felt pressure, they became less sure about protecting him. I also let Jordan mention, casually and professionally, that an independent reconciliation might be prudent. He framed it as caution, not accusation. Partners hate audits, but they hate scandal more. The seed of an external review was planted and began to germinate. Every move was deliberate. I timed document deliveries to coincide with board meetings. I built an encrypted folder of originals and left a traceable breadcrumb to a partner I trusted, not for drama, but to force institutional review. I did not threaten. I did not spread malice. I presented facts in the bland, polite tone that corporate law respects. Throughout it all, I dressed the part of the woman they had already decided she was: composed, a little fragile, quietly grateful when they reassigned my responsibilities. Mark watched me from a distance and smiled a smile that said he'd won. He believed I'd been broken. He believed I'd become small. He was wrong. On a rainy Thursday, I sat in my car outside the building, the encrypted drive on the passenger seat. Inside it, original decks, server logs, export hashes, Samantha's reluctant admissions, Mr. Lewis's timestamps, and the forensic accountant's notes. Jordan had agreed to present the materials to his legal counsel that afternoon and to keep them confidential until the partners could be approached. I switched off the engine and pressed my forehead to the cool glass. My hands didn't tremble anymore. The plan wasn't a single dramatic reveal. It was a slow, surgical exposure, facts that would make it impossible for Mark to spin. He still thought the story he'd written was permanent. He thought silence and optics could bury a $10 million truth. Let him believe that. Let him sleep under his false crown. Because when the boardroom opened and the audit began, there would be no laughter left, only the meticulous arithmetic of consequence. The morning the audit went live, the city felt thinner, as if the air had been vacuumed of small talk and polite smiles. I arrived early, not because I wanted to watch the fallout, but because I wanted to be present when truth was finally given its due. Presence is its own kind of power. Jordan Keene met me in the lobby with a quiet nod. He walked differently that day, not triumphant, not smug, only resolved. He had the weight of money unsettled in his voice. "We'll let facts speak," he said. "No theatrics." I nodded, and we moved toward the boardroom. Sterling and Rose leadership assembled with that same practiced ease that had once felt impenetrable. Partners in tailored suits, Mark looking rested and confident, Ethan brisk and aloof. They had prepared for fire. They did not expect ice. I sat at the table with Jordan and the forensic accountant perched beside me, our evidence stacked like a surgeon's instruments, drives, logs, dated printouts, and emails with immutable metadata. The independent auditor began with neutral questions, the kind that slice through spectacle and land on the plain math of things. He asked for version histories, server logs, and export records. We produced them. Calmly. Meticulously. The forensic report the accountant had prepared played like a short, devastating documentary across the conference room screen, side-by-side spreadsheets, timestamps showing edits from Mark's terminal, a copy from the USB Mr. Luis had found, and the email chain where Marcus, one of the partners, had forwarded a cheerleading note that accepted the inflated numbers without a second glance. When the auditor clicked to the slide that mapped exports to physical sign-ins, the room shifted. It was small things, a late-night export from Mark's workstation, a maintenance log marking the same hour, a visitor entry that placed Ethan near the server room. The numbers didn't scream. They simply fit together with surgical clarity. Mark tried to speak. He reached for charm first. It was habit. "This is an unfortunate misunderstanding," he began, his tone lubricated for spin. "We always meant the best for our client." The auditor held up a hand. "We simply follow the data," he said. "And the data points to internal manipulation." His voice was dry, not accusatory, just precise. It felt cinematic in the quietest way. No raised voices, no theatrical accusations, only the steady method of documentation being read aloud like testimony. When Jordan asked to see the copy we'd given him, I watched his eyes as he scrolled through the originals I'd saved. The color drained from his face the way it drains from concrete under salt. For him, the loss had been financial. For Mark, it was reputational, and reputations can be fatal in business. The partners huddled privately. Their faces, usually so carefully composed, showed the first small cracks. When they returned, the elder partner, whose family had founded the firm, cleared his throat. "Given the evidence presented," he said, voice flat as a ledger, "we must pause all dealings with the parties implicated and initiate an internal investigation." Effective immediately, Mark Holloway is placed on administrative leave pending further review. It was an elegant strike. No fists, no public humiliation, just corporate procedure applied like a scalpel. Mark's face, first confusion, then anger, settled into something hollow. He tried to call for a defense, attempted to reframe timelines, insisted on human error, but the metrics spoke louder than speeches. The board wasn't moved by charm, they were moved by risk. Outside the room, whispers became a current. Phones lit up with messages. An investor called. A legal counsel muttered to another. By noon, an official press notice drafted by PR had been circulated. Sterling and Rowe initiates independent inquiry into recent client discrepancies, leadership transitions to interim counsel pending results. The $10 million headline that had once been a crown became the wedge that pried the firm open. Through it all, I kept my composure. I answered questions clearly. I didn't gloat when Mark was escorted from his office. I didn't seek the cruelty of spectacle. My victory was its own kind of mercy. The market would do its work, and the people who had enabled the lie would face consequence without my stirring a public pylon. The final move wasn't legal. It was human. As reporters pressed for quotes and colleagues shifted positions, Jordan called a discreet meeting with the partners and legal counsel. He requested a formal pause on negotiations and a forensic audit of every major pitch the firm had made in the last 5 years. That one request rang louder than any press release. It meant investigations, potential restatements, and investor cold feet. The cost of cover-ups is not just money, it's trust, and trust is the currency of empires. Night came down like a promise. I walked out of the building without applause, without malice. Down at the curb, Mr. Luis waited, mop in hand, the city rain beating on his cap like pinpricks of light. He nodded, saying nothing typical. His quiet approval was gratitude without ornament. "You did right," he said. "Floors always tell the truth." I had wanted him to see me as more than the woman who knelt to help months ago. In that moment, I realized the revenge had never been about punishment. It had been about reclamation. I'd taken back my voice, my work, my dignity. The storm had been methodical, surgical, and, in the end, it had been merciful in a way I hadn't expected. Back in my apartment that night, I watched the firm's logo on my phone's news feed dissolve into analyst commentary. Mark's suspension, shareholder unease, and legal reviews ran like a slow-motion fall. I felt no immediate joy, only a deep, purifying calm. The anger that once made my chest ache had been distilled into clarity. I sat quietly, thinking of Jordan's last words before we left the office. You saved more than a contract. You saved the truth. And inside me, beneath the lingering quiet, something purer than revenge settled. The knowledge that when the people who built empires on other people's labor finally face the ledger, the truth balances the books. It's strange how silence feels different when the war is over. For months, the halls of Sterling and Rowe had echoed with meetings, excuses, and whispers that carried my name like a warning. Now, those same halls were quiet, not peaceful, but hollow. The kind of quiet that follows an explosion. The kind that tells you something has ended, and there's no going back. A week after Mark's suspension turned into a formal termination, I received the notice in my inbox. Internal investigation concludes. Misconduct verified. Termination effective immediately. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a sterile line of text marking the end of a man who once laughed in my face during a meeting. I didn't smile when I read it. I didn't feel triumphant. I just breathed. Deeply, for the first time in months. The firm's partners began to reach out privately, each message laced with "we regret" and "you were right." But their words didn't matter anymore. I'd spent too long waiting for validation from people who couldn't tell integrity from arrogance. Instead, I took a different kind of victory. When Jordan offered me a consulting contract to help restructure Regal's analytics division, I accepted, not out of revenge, but out of purpose. The $10 million account that Sterling and Rowe had lost became the foundation of something better, a data ethics team that reported directly to leadership. My department. My rules. It was Poetic. Really, the same woman they ignored was now designing the blueprint they should have listened to all along. Still, healing wasn't instant. Some nights I'd lie awake, replaying old moments in my head. Mark's smirk when he dismissed my concerns, Ethan's sideways glances in meetings, the fake encouragements that felt like knives under silk. I'd ask myself why I didn't see it sooner, why I let trust blind me. The answer always arrived quietly, because I believed in people. Because I thought decency was contagious. But now I understood something deeper. Decency isn't weakness. It's defiance. Choosing empathy in a world that rewards manipulation, that's strength. And I wasn't going to let anyone make me feel small for it again. The news cycle moved quickly after the audit. Within a month, Sterling and Rowe's reputation collapsed under its own weight. Clients withdrew. Investors demanded explanations. The board announced restructuring, which was corporate language for public penance. Mark's name trended for a week before disappearing into a blur of newer scandals. He tried launching a consultancy afterward, but no major firm touched him. The internet never forgets, and neither do the investors who lose millions. Meanwhile, I grew quieter, not smaller, but calmer. I didn't chase attention. I didn't gloat online. I worked, built, recruited a small team that believed in transparency, not theater. The satisfaction came in subtle moments, watching new employees learn that doing the right thing could still lead to success. And sometimes, when I'd pass Sterling and Rowe's old building on my way to meetings, I'd pause outside. The lights were dimmer now, the reception area emptier. The gold logo on the wall had lost its shine. Poetic justice isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. It just sits there, in plain sight, reminding everyone that arrogance has an expiration date. Months later, I received a message from Samantha, the junior analyst who'd once unknowingly helped Mark send the false report. She wrote, "I've been thinking about what happened. You could have destroyed all of us, but you didn't. You exposed the truth and still gave people room to recover. That's rare. I just wanted to say, thank you for not becoming like them." That message hit deeper than any apology from the top ever could. because it meant the cycle had been broken. I didn't need revenge anymore. I'd found something cleaner, legacy. On my last day consulting for Regal, Jordan stopped me by the glass doors overlooking the skyline. You know, he said, if they had just listened, they would have saved everything. I smiled softly. That's the problem with people who confuse confidence for competence, I replied. They don't hear warnings, they only hear challenges. He nodded, and I left him standing there, the city reflected in the glass like a mirror of possibilities. Outside, the wind carried a kind of stillness that felt earned. The chaos had burned away, leaving clarity behind. I walked forward, heels clicking against the pavement, head held high, not in arrogance, but in peace. I wasn't the woman they underestimated anymore. I was the one who saw the storm coming, stood firm through it, and rebuilt in its wake. They ignored my warnings. But in the end, it wasn't me who fell, it was their empire built on silence. Have you ever been ignored, dismissed, or betrayed by people who thought you were too small to matter? Did they underestimate your voice, your truth? Tell me your story in the comments. Let's remind the world that silence isn't weakness. It's just the pause before power speaks. And if you believe truth always finds its way, hit subscribe. Because stories like this, they're not just fiction, they're justice in motion.